is not my life. My life will take 30 seconds, at least on this. I want to talk to you, as David said, about behavior change. And this is a talk that I give in all kinds of settings. As I was saying to Max, I've given this kind of talk to hospital executives, which that was the first time I gave a talk, which was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done as a psychologist, sitting down with hospital CEOs to talk about behavior change. And I remember thinking, okay, this is either going to really work really well or it's going to really tank. I've done that. I've given this kind of talk in North Dakota to somewhere between 300 and 400 health and wellness people, broadly defined. That's all I knew about the audience. I've given this kind of talk to in Hoover to the Tobacco-Free Foundation in Hoover. And one of the things that is so nice about kind of what I do is everything I do has to do with behavior change. And so what I hope you'll get out of this is whether you're thinking about how is this applicable to me, how is this applicable to my kids, depending on how broad and liberal your line of thinking is, how applicable this is to my animals at home, my pets, my customers, my clients, my coworkers. What I hope you'll see is that kind of regardless of the way the slides are and the emphasis, etc., that ultimately this is about behavior change. And that what I hope you also see is that behavior change, it touches every part of our lives. Sometimes it is so pervasive that we don't even think about it. And depending on what your role is, what your interest is, etc., try to keep changing hats. Just think about what I'm talking about from a personal perspective, think about it from a professional perspective, and see, as we're talking about this stuff, how this kind of works. And what I hope you'll also find is that really no matter what your role is, this all kind of still works. And it all kind of still works because, thank God, there's a science to behavior change. Now, why is that relevant for me? So this slide deck encapsulates my professional career, which is both kind of neat and also pathetic when you think about it, because this is it, and there's nothing. So I kind of want to show you, because as David said, I now am over here, but I want to sort of show you how I got from over there to over here. So over there, I had hair before I started, and now I don't. But let me just kind of give you the breakdown. Undergraduate work at UCLA, why was that important? I met a man a guy named Ivar Lovas, who was a psychologist, who really showed me with real live children how behavioral science and behavior change could help autistic children live normal lives. That's probably what hooked me more than anything else to want to become a psychologist was, oh my God, this actually works. What I saw in the book and what I saw he did with children actually worked. Went down to San Diego. I was born and raised in LA. Went down to San Diego and got very interested and became a clinical psychologist. Got very interested in how do people who have health problems change their lifestyle, change their habits, change their ways. Did everything from chronic pain to post-traumatic stress disorder and chronic pain, just very interested in that. Also interested in why our healthcare delivery systems don't change people's behaviors the way we want them to. That was my sort of academic training. Well actually on the way to come to my first killer job at UAB, met a sweet woman from the South. And the people ask me how I got to UAB, and I always say it was a great job in the psychology department and a woman from Kentucky. That was in '96. Landed here in the landed here in the psychology department, and then quickly came over to the School of Public Health. And when I got to School of Public Health, they all said you should be in health behavior because you're a psychologist. And I said, I don't want to be in health behavior. I want to be in healthcare organization and policy because I want to understand why it is that as a psychologist who's trying to help people change their health behaviors, you can't get reimbursed for it. That's why I wanted to be there, and I sat with Mike Morrissey, and I said, that's why I want to be in this department. I'm going to surround myself with health economists. So that was there. Along the way, had a couple kids. Great for conducting behavioral modification experiments, particularly if you're fortunate enough to have one of each sex. Okay? Picked up a dog, increase your sample size and diversity in your sample, right? And it's perfect, more behavior modification. Then I wrote a book. I wrote a book because I wanted to I wanted to take the behavioral science out. I wanted to do more than take it into a different avenue than just manuscripts and just publications and just grants. And admittedly, I wrote a book because my mother said, "How come you're not an author?" And I said, "Mom," at the time, I said, "Mom, I've had like 42 publications." "Yeah, but nobody reads that. You know, if you had a book, then you're right." We'll let you know that right now, this book ranks, at least as of last week, about 789,000 and something or another on the Amazon top list. After I wrote the book, picked up one more dog, and a 4 with equal parts human and animal. So we run experiments all day long at my house. And did I tell you my wife's a psychologist too? She is. She trained me. And then, about 6 years ago, I had an opportunity to get involved with a company that wanted to take technology that was used in the retail loyalty space. So technology that could process what you bought, look at SKU transactions, and run loyalty programs in retail, and they wanted to port it over to healthcare. I didn't understand what that meant exactly. But after a little while, I realized that now there was an opportunity to do behavioral science with the technology that could possibly let me do it at scale. And we'll get at that at the end. And now I serve as the chief behavioral scientist for this company. The point is that throughout the entire thing, my whole career, I've always been fascinated in how do we get people to change behavior. It's my wife calling right now. Sorry. One other thing I was going to tell you. Okay. So a couple things. Anyone ever have a psych class, intro to psych? Okay. So this is kind of brush off the cobwebs just a little bit. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but there are some things that I want you to remember, and hopefully we'll be able to put it in a new context. Some of the concepts that I want to talk about are so basic that we forget about them. And they're so basic that we actually get kind of lazy with them, even though we had Psych 101. And when we get lazy with them, then sometimes they don't work very well. And as a psychologist, I'm somewhere between a card-carrying professional and that I want to work for the good nature of the profession. And there's nothing worse than being a psychologist to hear something like, that behavior change stuff, that doesn't work. You know, that psychological stuff, that doesn't work. So part of my job when I go out and talk is talk about how do you make it work? How do you make it work the right way? So hopefully I can show you that today. And I'm behind the podium because I am doing my own. Oh, I know what I was going to tell you. So now that I work with a company, this is fun. I don't get to make my own slides. I get to make my own slides, the content's mine. But as I was telling Laura, there's all this formatting stuff, and all this has got to go through all this approval and all this stuff. So I have notes just to make sure that it's all consistent with the story. So what is behavioral science? It's an empirical approach to understanding, evaluating, and changing human behavior, which absolutely that sounds very nice, it sounds very academic, and it doesn't really say much. If you think about it, behavioral science really is the science of doing. It is understanding how and why people and other organisms do the actions that they do. And particularly at a practical level, and again, this is what I would say, this is a non-academic talk. This is a non-academic discussion. This is trying to take this idea of science and bring it to heart. If you think about behavioral science as a science of doing, you're in a much better position to use it broadly than if you think about it as an empirical approach to understanding, evaluating, and changing human behavior. It's what we do. It's what we do and don't do. So now, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think you are in the business of behavior change? And here's how I want you to answer that question. Let's figure this out. It's a small enough group that you probably don't have to disclose, although you can if you want. Well, let's disclose. I'm a psychologist. By show of hands, are you a parent? Are you a sibling? Are you a spouse? Are you a friend? Are you an employee? Are you a coworker? in each of those roles, or any of those roles, do you have things that you do? Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. Okay. So, let me stop there for a second. If you didn't raise your hand to any of those, and it's not just because you're shy, and if you don't have any roles, and you don't have any things that you do, then you don't have any reason to be here. And you can go put your coat on, let's say go outside, it's a nice day, go out and brave the cold, maybe go have a cup of coffee, maybe go for a run, maybe go shopping. You can go do all of that if you don't have any roles and don't have any actions. But if you go do all that, then you're doing behavior, right? So you can never get away from it. So you have to stay here at least till whatever David said, till 4 o'clock. It's everywhere. Here's the other problem. It's a problem and it's the beauty. So just as you were thinking about the roles that you play, and you're thinking about your actions, you could pretty quickly come up with a really long list of things that you do in any of your roles. And that list can get longer and longer and longer the more roles we play. As a result, we can feel, oh my God, I've got a 13-year-old and 15-year-old home, I have a wife that works, and we have kids going all over, I got a kid with a learner's permit, and I'm all over the place. I'm doing a bazillion different behaviors. So on the one hand, I can think about my life in terms of all of the behaviors that I have to do, and it can be very overwhelming. Or I can think about it slightly differently, and I can think about having a common denominator. That is the behavior. So if you think about all of the disparate behaviors I do, they're disparate, but they're all behaviors. And if they're all behaviors, you can tie that back to scientific principles and methods and techniques. And I was talking with Laura about this earlier. And this is why I really encourage you, I encourage myself. I have a wife who's a psychologist, so I can't ever get away from it. Think about how do these things apply in what you do for others, what you do for yourself, what you do as a pet owner. It all comes together, and you can use the same principles, the same technique, the same strategies in different ways. So it's not a bunch of disparate behaviors, it's all behavior. So it all ties back. I'm going to show you how. I'm not just going to stop at that point. It's the other thing about working in a company. You put in slide transitions. I don't like slide transitions. I don't have a choice. Okay. So here's something kind of, I guess it's not very altruistic thinking, but it's not. We need people, whoever those people are, and sometimes it's ourselves, to behave in certain ways, to do certain things in order to achieve certain outcomes. We need our kids to do well in school, to study, we need to exercise, we need other people to exercise, we need to go to work and get money. We need to do things in certain ways. And if those things don't occur, if people don't do things in certain ways, then we don't get the outcomes we're looking for. Here's the biggest challenge I think particularly those of us in healthcare have. But we have this as parents too. We think of ways to change other people's behaviors, or we think of interventions that are going to help people. If I tell my kids to study, then they will study, and if they study, they'll be successful. If I tell my patients they need to lose weight and eat healthier, they will lose weight, they'll eat healthier, they'll have less risk of cardiovascular disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? We come up with these great ideas. If I have my employees work on a certain shift, and I rotate the shifts this way, we'll have much more productivity. We come up with these ideas, and then, damn, people don't do it. The kids don't study, nobody eats the right way, blah, 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 blah. And if you think about it, if you've ever been in this position, you get so frustrated because you thought what you came up with was really good. I had a great weight loss intervention. I had a great smoking cessation program. I had a great plan for my kids to eat better and to study. But the reality is, if people don't do what we need them to do, then whatever it is that we designed to get them to do it is not working. it's not effective. And I can't tell you how many times I sit with organizations and they are ticked off. We designed this and this is supposed to be this way and the people aren't doing it and something's wrong with them. Maybe. But really, it's something's wrong with the way we designed it. So it's important to understand that when it comes to trying to get these effective outcomes and getting people to do the behaviors you want, if they're not doing it, then something's wrong with the setup. It's much easier to think about it that way. Well, it's much more productive to think about it that way. It's easier to say something's wrong with them, but it's much more productive to think about it that way. And I'm going to show you some techniques to figure out how and why and what is going wrong and how to fix it. Oh, good. Yes. So when I was an undergraduate a long time ago, this guy, Ivar Lovaas, told me when I was taking a learning class, he said, human behavior is not random. It's predictable and lawful. It's not even necessarily rational. It's predictable and lawful. If it's random, if human behavior is truly random, then there is no science to behavior change. And if there is no science, if it's random, then there's no science, and then there's no science, then people like me don't have a job, and we don't have an area of study. That is not to say that for any one individual, you can predict everything they're going to do. You already know that. That is not to say that people will behave what we think to be rationally, but it is to say that humans behave on whole in a lawful way, in a way that is explainable. That's really important. If you don't believe that or you don't buy that, then it's hard to buy into behavioral science. Now I'm going to show you the cutest little video. I'm going to ask you this question. Who is controlling who? Who is controlling who? Who's You'll see. But I ask you this question. Who is controlling who? Who is controlling who?
Who is controlling whom?
Who is controlling who?
I was an English major.
I was. And let's keep our fingers crossed that this actually works. So this, I've watched this video like 100 times, and it tickles me every single time I watch it. I was saying to Laura, if we had YouTube video when I taught undergraduate, this would have been the perfect video. Because the title of the video, when you pulled off YouTube, was something like, 3-year-old controls 500 adults, right? That's the title of the video. And I looked at it and I went, oh no, this is shaping, what we call shaping. This is the use of reinforcement to shape behavior. Because, and we won't go back and spend 30 minutes analyzing it, but if you watched in the beginning, what happened? He stood there and did nothing, and the crowd did something, and he did what, Skinner would call sort of like a superstitious behavior. He did something, and then they did it. And then there was this pause, and you can't see it, but in there, guess what? The wheels were turning. So he engaged in the behavior again, and they did. And by the time we were done, his behavior was being controlled by their response. Their reinforcement of his behavior. Every time he did something, they gave a consequence that increased the chance that it happened again. Now you could argue the other way around. But the point is that interaction, that's learning. That's behavior modification. That's positive reinforcement. You can see it right there. It's also really cute. But it's something that reminds me that this is still in place. Now, can you go from that to managing diabetes at scale? Hopefully by the time I'm done, I'm going to show you yes. It's not quite that simple. But it does tell me that human behavior is lawful. And like I said, it's really cute. I agree with that. Okay. So, can we quantify and predict behavior? Been in UAB almost 18 years. If the answer was no, then I somehow scooted through the whole publication 10-year review process because I've been based my whole career on that. So you know what the answer is going to be, or at least my answer. My answer is going to be yes. And I know what you're thinking now because I'm a clinical psychologist. You're going, oh dear God, is he going to start at the top and start explaining each one of these things in painstaking detail because that's what he was trying to do? No. Just by show of hands, how many of any of this familiar to anybody? Couple, yeah, okay. Okay. So, academicians and scientists, we spend our entire careers trying to figure out the best models of behavior change, the most refined models of behavior change. What works the best? What are the advantages and disadvantages of different theories and different models? That's good. It's important. We need to do that. But people get very hung up on, is this one better than this one? Is this one better than this one? And from an academic standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, we need to do that. But for the rest of us, if we're not in an academic mindset, then suffice to say that at least, and these are just representative, these are all good. These can all help you. These are all interesting and well-validated ways of explaining behavior change. And at least what I see parents do this, I see organizations do this, they get very hung up on which book, which theory, which model. And the answer is that if you cut the junk out, that there's lots of good, empirically validated stuff, and it's important not to get hung up on which model. It's more important to understand where the commonalities and how can the models be best used for what your intended purpose is. Again, I'm talking practical. I'm not talking academic. I'm not talking scientific. Does that make sense? Because I cannot tell you how many parents and organizations kind of get stuck here. Is it this model or that model? To some degree, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a model that I like, that makes sense to me, and I'm not going to go into painstaking detail. But think about this. Behavior that is followed by a consequence. Behavior is followed by a consequence, and the nature of the consequence modifies the organism's tendency to repeat the behavior in the future. Make sense? We've all heard about it. B.F. Skinner was very controversial. He's still controversial. You know how I know that? Because working for a corporation, I was told to get out on social media and start putting my views out on social media, and I got out on LinkedIn, and I started posting in a group, and I was posting things about behavior change and reinforcement, and I got ripped to shreds by one sort of faction of belief that said that humans are not rodents. And it was a very, yeah, I know. And I wanted to say, well, kind of we are, you know, and I know, but anyway. But this, what's so important about this is very few people would say this is not true. All of us know about this, and Skinner was really one of the first to say, okay, can we take that concept and apply scientific principles to it? Can we turn it into a science? Now, this, as complex and boring as it looks, can change your life. And let me tell you something else about working for a corporation. I love this, because I've had such a journey in the last 6 years. This is so much prettier than what I had come up with. Just the shades of green and blue added a friendliness to it. Because if I would have showed you what I had, and it was just we rounded things, because the roundedness makes it seem not so bad. Okay. This really can be the mechanics to understanding behavior change. It really, really can be. And I'm going to get into some of the details, but suffice to say, this is a way of understanding how the environment actions in the environment, consequences in the environment, and communication all kind of come together to influence behavior. So I'll start here. I'm going to add something to an environment to increase behavior. This is where you got to brush off that Psych 101. Okay? I go to work, I have a consequence. It happens sometimes monthly, sometimes twice monthly, and this thing happens, and then my bank account goes up. Okay? There is money added into my environment to increase the probability that I go to work. A little boy claps, and 500 people cheer after him. Okay? Cheering is added to the environment so that the behavior goes up. It's positive reinforcement. That's the easiest one. Think about it from healthcare. I complete a smoking cessation program, and somebody puts money into my flexible spending account. Positive reinforcement. That's the one we all know about. Okay. And we use it, and it's great. But what I'll show you is there's other things that you can use too that are also great. The reason I bring this up, not so much for this group, but it's sort of that psychologist pet peeve. Negative reinforcement is not the same as punishment. I know. I know we all know it, I just have to vent a little bit. I run around, cannot tell you how many people, we got positive reinforcement, and then we got negative reinforcement, and that's punishment. No, it's not. So negative reinforcement just simply says, I want my behavior to increase, so I'm going to take something away from the environment, right? I'm going to take bad things away so that the behavior goes up, okay? If I engage in purchasing generic medication, then that bad copay goes away. I take the copay away, then the probability that I'm going to use that, I'm going to refill the generic medication goes up, okay? Here's one where it works in the opposite. Johnny, little Johnny, sits down, and his parents put broccoli on the table, and little Johnny looks at the broccoli, he smells the broccoli, and he starts crying. And he's crying, so his parents take the broccoli away. Next day, little Johnny sits down at the table, put the broccoli on the table, and he's crying, so he takes it away. Next day, mom's coming around the corner with the broccoli, and what is Johnny going to do? Cry. And guess what? Every single time they're strengthening that habit. They are removing a bad thing, broccoli, and in order for the probability of the behavior, not the one that they want, the one that he wants, crying to increase. Okay? Remove a bad thing. Copay waivers, broccoli. What else do I have in here? Another one. Let's just. You can use the same from a benefit standpoint. Complete my smoking cessation program, and my premium is reduced. Negative reinforcement. Okay. Punishment. Lots of controversy around punishment. Smoke, and you can pay a surcharge. Speed, you can get a ticket. Do something bad, you might get a spanking. Go to the ER when you could go to some other more appropriate urgent care, and you get charged twice as much. This is the application, right? Simple application of something into the environment to decrease the behavior. There are problems with punishment. There are sort of what we call iatrogenic effects if it's too much over time. But in some cases, we want that to occur. We want to put something into the environment to decrease the chance, you keep hearing me use the word chance, that the behavior occurs. So you've already got three, we're going to do one more, but you've already got three different ways that you can engage that behavior. You can influence the behavior. It's not just about giving good things when someone does the right thing, and it's not just about spanking. So this is the hardest one. I don't know why, I couldn't even come up with examples. I mean, I have them now, but I couldn't come up with examples. Negative punishment. It's like, there's, people like me, what does that mean? We're going to take something away from the environment in order to decrease the behavior. Flexible spending accounts. Flexible spending cards, I do healthcare. Sometimes you swipe the card and you get this thing in the mail that says you need substantiation. You've got to mail something in, right? Mail something in to your EOB to explain that whatever you bought was legit. and you don't mail it in because it's a pain in the neck. And so you don't mail it in, you don't mail it in, and then you go swipe your card, and guess what? Your card doesn't work, okay? We have now removed a good thing from your environment in order to decrease your behavior. We have froze your card, we have stopped your card from working in order to decrease the chance that you'll try to use your card without substantiating your paperwork. My house, simpler one. You engage in non-study behavior in my house. And guess what gets removed from your environment? Oh, yeah. Yeah, it used to be just, when they were younger, it's like, how about you have the iPod? Now, it's like I have like a cart. No study behavior, here we go. iPad, iMac, this, that, stick it all in there and it's all mine. I'm taking away a good thing in order to decrease the chance of you doing that non-study behavior. Okay? So, think about this, and this is important. Not that you're going to go through this, use this every day, but think about it. We spend a lot of time trying to change behavior up here, and then we go, see, it doesn't work. There's a whole portfolio. And depending on what you're trying to achieve, what the circumstances are, you have an opportunity to influence that. Now, a couple other things. Oops. Let me go back here. There's that little tiny bud in the flower. That was my idea, by the way. Because we had talked about cueing and communication. I said, let's just put it in the middle, and then it'll be like a flower. We'll put the little bud. Communication is very important, because if people can't orient to what it is that you want them to do, what the consequences are, then they won't engage in the behavior. So this whole idea of telling your child what's going to happen, letting your friend know that if they engage in this behavior, you're going to support them, letting somebody know that if they don't substantiate their flexible spending a card, they're going to get a penalty. The role of communication is very important because it tells the person this is what the environmental context is. The reason I have that in there is to point out that this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Without this, then these things don't work. Now, I'm going to pull it together for you quickly. Quickly. Okay. So here's another funny story. We're trying to come up over at Chip Rewards with a nice way of kind of putting this all together. And I always talk about that we talk about behavioral costs, which I'll talk about in a minute, the consequences that we were talking about, the culture or the environment that behaviors happen, and the communication. So it's got the 4 C's. So somebody over in our organization said, oh, perfect, C to the 4th. C to the 4th equals P. So they made this thing, it looks really nice, and I brought it home to my 15-year-old. The very first thing he says, that's not C to the 4th. That's not C to the 4th, Dad, because those are 4 different C's. Dude, I'm not going to do C1 times C2 times C3. Just it doesn't work. Give me a little license. So I asked you to give a little license. We've been talking about this, but if you think about how do we get people to change, then it is all of these things. Max left, but Max Michael is a big believer of this. He believes that, I say this on tape, he believes that this is what ultimately drives behavior change. What I would argue is that this mix of things are what drives behavior change. So it's not just the consequences, it's these 4 things. And I'm going to go through the other 3 very quickly because I think they're very important. Because a lot of times, I was talking to Laura, when this is not happening, it's not working, it's not having an impact, it's not having an impact because you're not taking into account these other factors. Okay. So, it's behavioral cost, it's not financial cost. Behavioral cost, if you think, again, I was raised with economists. I'm not an economist, but I was raised amidst economists and an anthropologist too, so it's kind of interesting, my academic family. Behavioral cost is sort of what is the topography of the behavior? Is it hard? Is it easy? Does it have to happen frequently or not frequently? Think about this. Exercise. There's a difference between exercising, running on a treadmill for 15 minutes once, and running on a treadmill for 15 minutes 5 days a week. There's different behavioral costs to that. Here's another one we use with healthcare. We talk about one-time events. I work with an incentive company, so incentivizing people to do something. An annual physical is an annual event, right? A colonoscopy, it's not annual, but it's also a one-time event, right? Do they have equal behavioral costs? Probably not. I'm 46, so I don't know yet about the second one. Okay. But the idea of understanding the topography of the behavior is very important because that's what's going to drive the consequence. So before we do anything, we need to understand, is it a hard behavior? Is it easy behavior? Is it meaningful to the person? How frequently is it occurring? All these kinds of things help us better understand what it is that how it is that we should align our consequence. Now the consequences, we talked about sort of the positive and negative stuff, but what we didn't talk about, again, brush off that Psych 101, frequency, intensity, and duration. I have someone who's never exercised before, or they haven't exercised in decades, and I want them to exercise every day, okay? Do I tell them that once you've exercised for 6 weeks, let's just say a month, if you've exercised for a month, 5 days a week, flawlessly, then at the end of that month, I'll give you $100. That's one incentive structure. Another incentive structure would be, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $3 every day that you exercise. Or I'll give you $1.50 for every 10 minutes that you exercise. The whole idea of reinforcing on a continuous schedule, frequently, when it's a new behavior, is important. Now someone has been exercising for a while. Do we have to keep doing that forever? No. Now we can vary it up a little bit. We can fade the reinforcer. So the whole idea of, depending on what the behavior is and when, can also determine the consequence. I'll go back to the colonoscopy versus the annual physical. We're talking financial incentives, which is probably needed to get someone to do one versus the other. Does it take more to get somebody to do a colonoscopy versus to go to an annual physical? Probably, at least that's been our experience, because why? More of a behavioral cost, so the greater value proposition. Okay, culture. This is the idea that Max is talking about. These behaviors don't happen in a vacuum. They happen within the context of a social environment. We have clients who say things like, we don't believe in incentives. Incentives don't work. We have clients who say, we don't give financial incentives. We have other clients who say, our employees, and this, I say this I'm not referring here, our employees are healthcare providers, they should be healthy. Anyway, these are the environmental contexts. We have things like environmental context or culture, Affordable Care Act. That sets parameters. So, I mean, it almost goes without saying that whatever you're trying to do to manipulate that behavior is happening within a larger social context. Laura and I have teenagers, okay? We can tell them one thing, but we know that the social context, the cultural context, is driven primarily by all these other kids, not by us, not by the other kids. And so that affects the probability of the behavior happening. Now, and we talked about communication. If you don't know what's going on, if you don't communicate, it doesn't happen. This is the most important part of this, though, at the end. And this is the part that I want everyone to understand, myself included. When you're talking about changing people's behavior, yourself included, it is all about the probability or the chance or increasing the chance that behavior happens. We have free will, and humans do not respond the way we want them to, ourselves included, 100% of the time. It's hard to get people to understand that addressing these things doesn't guarantee the behavior will happen, but it does increase the chance that the behavior will happen. It increases the probability that behavior happens. This is really important if you're a parent of a teenager, if you're the owner of a dog, or if you're trying to change an entire community. Why? Because you have to think about what is it going to take to increase the chance that this occurs, and is it worth it to increase the chance this much? My economist colleagues and myself and some others, we spend a lot of time trying to quantify that. How much cost does it take to produce this much change? That's the whole idea. But if you can live within this and understand this, then you understand the essence of behavior change. Now, so let's think about this quickly. Watch this. Again, corporation. I could be feuded. I could have my entire life dependent on trying to figure out how to make that happen. Could never do it, as we talked about, our teenagers could. So this is Sheila. Oh, I think I have some more. Yes. Sheila is a nurse. She's over 40. She has diabetes, and she uses brand name medications. And she works for this is nobody at UAB. This is so funny, because these are all fictitious, but here I am. This is not anyone at UAB. I don't think it's anyone at UAB. It's stock photo. How do we help Sheila better take care of her diabetes? Okay? And if you think about it, using those 4 components, the behavioral costs, the consequences, accounting for the culture, or influencing the culture, and influencing the communication. So, let's quickly, let's start off with behavioral costs. What is it that we want Sheila to do? She's diabetic, and it's not well controlled. So what behaviors might we want her to engage in?
Healthier eating.
Healthier eating. What else? What?
Exercise.
Exercise. Health promotion people, where's physicians? Medication. Medication adherence. Have her hemoglobin A1C, have her eye exam, her foot exam, check her glucose levels. Diabetes is, I don't know, study of diabetes. I mean, diabetes behaviorally is incredibly complex and diversified. Lots of things you have to do. So we might want her to exercise, we might want her to eat different, we might want her to take medications. All of these sort of behaviors that have different sort of costs in terms of their components. That's the cost. Consequences. How can we influence the chance that she'll do those things? What can we do to get her to do that? We can give her a spanking? No. That's a joke. It's late. What can we do? I'm a psychologist. I'm a clinical psychologist. Silence means nothing to me. You can sit here and stand around the camera.
She could meet my cousins who had both of her feet amputated because of diabetes. I mean, no, it's dramatic, but that's a consequence.
Absolutely. We could show her something grotesque. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And we could add something into that environment, i.e. fear, that may decrease the chance that she is non-compliant. What else can we do?
You have her on a brand name, put her on generic.
Put her on generic, which would help
Reduce the cost.
reduce costs. May or may not really help her more, but yes, you're fiscally, absolutely. What else?
What about giving her a buddy that's already got their diabetes under control?
Social
A
support.
mentor.
Kind of,
Kind of.
absolutely. Right. We could also incentivize her. We could change her. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just think from the psychology perspective, it really depends on her, because she could be taking brand name, because even though she's a nurse, she might not believe the generics are as effective.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, there are all kinds of nuances that may be affecting her. So we've got lots of things that we can do. One of the points is that before you're going to go ahead and produce change in Sheila, you do have to sort of articulate or operationalize what is that change going to be. So we have the behaviors, we have the consequences, the culture. What can we do from sort of a cultural, policy, environmental, broad macro standpoint to influence change? It's happening actually it's happening right now in a lot of organizations. If your A1Cs are out of control and you don't engage in diabetes disease management intervention, guess what we can do? Raise your premiums. Absolutely. Absolutely. Unless you request a reasonable alternative, and if you request a reasonable alternative, then we have to give you a reasonable alternative by the Affordable Care Act. But, absolutely, we can do that. We can also set, you're a healthcare provider. Shame on you. That's another environmental context. Okay, so there's culture that we can, some of which we can affect, some of which we can't. for the house. And then finally, how do we let her know about all these fabulous things about the buddy and the cousin and the premium? What are we gonna do? Send a mailer to her house? We could. What else could we do? Come on, people, it's late. This is easy stuff.
Well, if we were in Atlanta, we could put up billboards stigmatizing various medical conditions.
That's good. We could do that. We can send her, what, go ahead.
Well, I was thinking, make it easy for her to meet with a healthcare provider.
Absolutely.
Make- remove the barriers.
And one of the ways to do that is to notify her, send her a text message, an email message, something that says healthcare provider is available right here at the right time in this. So that's the whole idea of those. So you put those things into action, and the reason that I have that is, this gets back to the same idea. In order to get her to change her behaviors, these are just examples, these things have got to line up. Now this is illustrative examples only. But these things all add up to affect this. If we forget about one of these, if we don't take these things into account, then this goes down. That heuristic is really important because very often we'll say, well, God, we paid her or we punished her or we did this or we did that and she didn't change her behavior. Well, did you take into account the prevailing culture? Did you take into account the fact that she didn't know that her premium was going to go up? I can't tell you how many organizations I work with now. Well, we sent a mailer home. Well, by the time the mailer got there, the premium already went up. Seriously. Yes. This is like, or I get this now, I go to a gym, I already pay my membership dues, and I get these fancy mailers all the time that says, come join our gym. The instructors at the gym get the same fancy mailers. Okay, so communication obviously is important, and then also taking into account the cost, the difference between her, we said, going to meet with a DM provider, disease management provider. Well, that's great. If she can only meet at 12 o'clock on Tuesday, then the behavioral cost is much greater because she's working her shift. All of these things factor in there. Now, so you got it down. You can fix Sheila, no problem. Yay. Okay. I'm a public health guy by training. Now what are we going to do? And by the way, you'll love this. Another great corporate thing. Where is Sheila? Yeah, okay. Oh no, but look at this. This stock photo. This Photoshop by our graphic design person to increase the likeness, and then increase the likeness of this to this. Just subtle changes. Nice, huh? I didn't even notice it. The graphic person was very upset. But think about it. Public health, this is what we're dealing with. We came up with great ideas for Sheila, but how are we going to do that? We got a lot more diabetics than Sheila. We have it just here at UAB. We know about it in Alabama. We know about it in the Southeast. I want you to think about something that I was talking to Laura again before. This is so important. When I got to UAB, the technology was not in place to change Sheila's behavior at scale. We struggled not with good science, but we struggled with how are we going to take it out to the masses. And we all know what's changed in technology. We know just the exponential changes in technology. The most important thing to a guy like me as a behavioral scientist is now there exists the technological means to do the good science. The science wasn't bad before, it was clunky. We couldn't deliver it. So I want you to think about something. Let's say we have 10,000 Sheilas, okay? If they have diabetes, we still have to figure out what are the behavioral costs, we have to do the communication, we have to do all that. The problem is we have to be able to do it at scale. We can't just introduce everyone
To Mona's cousin.
to Mona's cousin. I mean, now we actually can have a solution. Take a picture of Mona's cousin, do a video thing, right?
Like if your graphics tomorrow.
There you go. But I want us to think about this because this is one of the problems, particularly those of us who train clinically. We have these great interventions that work at the individual level, and then once we get to the population level, it all kind of seems to fall apart, or at the very least, the potency goes down. So watch this. here's Sheila's behaviors. We want her to have I'm not saying this, she wanted to have her A1C, take her medication, we want her to meet with a disease management coach, all these sorts of things. Well, guess what? All those sorts of things now, they can be tracked for Sheila. Ooh. Look at that. I wonder if there was, I'll bet there's a little timer thing on it. Oh no. There's data sources now that represent those behaviors. A healthcare claim can tell us if she had an A1C. We can get a file feed from a DM provider. If she needs to log her food or her exercise, we can get it from a web-based source. The other thing we can do is we have the ability to put mathematical rules into place that say, if we get this file that Sheila has done this and Sheila logs on to the web page, then we want to make sure that she gets a communication, an email that says that she's done a good job, and we want to send a notification to the bank to put $50 into her account. We can do that now. We now can do this at scale. And the beauty about that is it allows us to do exactly what I talked about, not just for one Sheila, but for lots of Sheilas. We couldn't do it that well 15 years ago because we weren't able, we collectively, technologically, we weren't able to pull all this data in and run all these rules and generate all these outputs, and we didn't have the web, and we didn't. My point is that from a behavior change standpoint, there are things that you can do individually with your children, with your coworkers, with your friends, that still work the same way as before we had the internet. But for those of us who are very concerned, and we should all be, about how we make mass change, technology now allows us to take the science and deliver it in a much more efficient way. And we should never call into question or compromise on the soundness of the science because we figure we can't deliver it. Particularly around health, we can deliver it now. When we don't need the technology, we can pull back and we can focus on these kinds of things at the individual level. So the whole point is that whether you're talking about how you're raising your kids, how you're changing your own behavior, or how you're going after diabetes at the population, there's a portfolio of ways to help people change. It's never about one thing. It doesn't have to be a million different techniques. You can boil it down, and if you use those, much the way, if you think about permutations and combinations, if you use those in that way, you are translating good science. And you're translating good science into your personal use, you're translating good science for your colleagues, for your friends, you can translate good science in for the masses. Good science, good behavioral science can be practical, it also can be very impactful. Say what you like about Mark Cuban, but this was a cool quote I found. Growing up, we were repeatedly told to dream big, to never stop dreaming, and to believe in our dreams. However, we are not told enough that dreams are accomplished by taking action. Dreams are merely thoughts. The doing is more powerful than the dreaming. The doing is what changes the world and impacts people in unforeseen ways. We have more control over the doing than we give ourselves credit. If you spend all of your time dreaming, you will never grant yourself the opportunity to see what you are truly capable of accomplishing. This is not to say, don't dream. But this is to say, take that dream, whatever it is, whether it's for you, your kids, society, and see how you can, we like to say, operationalize it. How do we turn it into action? Because if you don't turn it into action, then it just stays here. I think I have one more. I'm sure many of you know him. And I thought this got me crying just when I heard him say it at the ESPYs. But it does speak to the science of doing. So Stuart Scott, ESPN anchor who just passed. When you die, it does not mean that you lost to cancer. You do not lose to cancer. You beat cancer by how you live, why you live, and in the manner in which you live. And Stuart Scott was talking about winning by being present, by being there, by doing. Doing is very important. If we don't do, then nothing happens. I'm done.